Back to today's video. Today is Monday, March 31st, 2025, and today we are going to be talking about an election set to take place tomorrow, April 1st, 2025, in the state of Wisconsin, one of the closest battleground states from the 2024 presidential election. The 2025 Wisconsin Supreme Court race has become a largely nationalized race over the past year. This is a race that has been long seen by Democrats since Donald Trump's election as the first opportunity to push back against a second Trump administration coming in a battleground state where its effects can be felt to the greatest degree. And that comes as a result of a retirement from a Democratic justice or a liberally aligned justice in the Wisconsin Supreme Court that contributed to Democrats winning back ideological control in the state of Wisconsin for the first time in decades in 2023. But her retirement resulted in a prompt election, an election at which we now see two contenders, one Democratic aligned, one Republican aligned, that are set to contest tomorrow, in which both parties have funneled in nearly $100 million in a Wisconsin Supreme Court race that the previous record had been set back in 2023 with just under $50 million in the race. Given this is the first major election in a battleground state since Trump's race, a lot of Democrats are also looking to it not necessarily just as a reflection or a pushback on a Trump administration, but also as a level of enthusiasm indicator for Democrats in elections that aren't nationalized on the presidential level or even on the midterm level to see how they turn out in elections like these. It also comes in with a third new strategy, a third new way for Democrats to test the waters with something that we would like to call the Musk strategy that Democrats have been employing in special elections and in a lot of their messaging over the past 3 months. And it comes in with Elon Musk, a senior advisor to Donald Trump, who has now been brandished as this Republican affiliate that is damaging the GOP in terms of how he is perceived. Roughly a year ago, if we were to do national polling, and there is national polling on this, on Elon Musk's approval rating nationwide, how do people see him, the billionaire, tech mogul who ran Tesla and is involved with Twitter and all these different things, how did people perceive him? Well, despite his right-wing, feelings and views, largely after the 2022 midterm elections, the American public largely had a more positive view of Elon Musk than a negative one. But over the past year even, and especially in these past 2 months, the approval rating around Elon Musk has turned far more negative than that of any other nationalized Republican figure, far worse than Donald Trump, far worse than J.D. Vance, and it is only declining. Elon Musk, someone who is not eligible himself to be president of the United States, has been largely associated with the Oval Office by the Democratic Party. And it doesn't just end on the national level. It trickles down into statewide politics, into congressional politics, and yes, even Supreme Court elections like this one. Politico has a great article here where they discuss this new strategy for Democrats that they are testing in states like these. They're testing in elections like the one in Pennsylvania and the two in Florida set to take place tomorrow, where they associate Elon Musk with that of the Republican contender, saying that Elon Musk is either trying to buy the race or trying to involve himself in a way that is just simply not necessary for somebody of his stature. And you can see that really in a lot of the attack ads that have been playing out. They associate the Republican, the conservatively aligned Justice Brad Schimmel, in this race with Elon Musk. They put them in together on billboards, on TV advertisements, on social media, all for the purpose of associating these Republicans, these candidates, with Elon Musk. And so I bring up all three things to point out that this election will be a real test for Democrats on individual turnout, on Donald Trump pushback, and on a newfound disapproval of Elon Musk and how voters react to it. Now, this video's purpose isn't just to cover the race, but rather provide context as to what we might expect tomorrow evening. Wisconsin historically has tended to lean more towards the Democrats in recent elections with their state Supreme Court races. Going back 5 years ago to 2020, April 7th, the day Wisconsin actually held their Democratic primary around this time. To give you a bit to more orient you, COVID-19 had just been declared a national emergency roughly a month prior. Joe Biden was the presumptive Democratic nominee at this point. Bernie Sanders was on the road to dropping out. I think dropped out right after these primaries. And what we had seen pretty much around this time frame was that this election was going to be the first major one held in a swing state with absentee voting and a decreased level of enthusiasm because of COVID-19. But in a way, it was still increased because people had more of an opportunity to vote. All to say that on April 7th, 2020, Daniel Kelly, who was the incumbent justice, a Republican-aligned justice, lost his race to Jill Karofsky in this race in 2020 by a margin of 11 points. But this was, again, weird circumstances. The next opportunity for Republicans would come 3 years later when they nominated, yet again, a Republican named Daniel Kelly, or non-Republican, technically nonpartisan justice, who was affiliated with the Republican Party. Daniel Kelly against Janet Protasewicz, who ended up defeating him by a margin of, get this, roughly 11 points. Democrats have done well in the Wisconsin State Supreme Court races, and I honestly don't expect that to end tomorrow. I think based on what we've been seeing, despite the very much national influence of Elon Musk and his money in this race, and the way that it's being perceived and the way that it's becoming a very nationalized race, Barack Obama endorsing, the Democrat in this race, or I guess the liberally aligned justice, I have to make that distinction because it's important, Donald Trump endorsing the conservative aligned justice, we're starting to see really just a back and forth between top Democrats, top Republicans, people who involve themselves in races like this because it is breaking down by ideology, and there is a lot of money in this race. But the stakes actually are even higher than just talking about what pushback is against Trump, what pushback is against Musk, and what enthusiasm there is for Democrats. We talked about this yesterday in a video. We discussed the Wisconsin Supreme Court composition. And a lot of it really mattered, not just because of what it meant on the national stage, but also because of what Wisconsin was doing in relation to the national stage. The Democratic Party and the Democrats and the liberally aligned justices winning back the ideological majority that fateful day of April 4th, 2023 meant from here on out up until now, the liberal justices have pretty much held by party rank, passing, or not passing, that's not the right term for it, bringing down court decisions that really struck to the core of the Republican Party. They have focused heavily on redistricting initiatives, ensuring that abortion rights is legalized in the state of Wisconsin up to 22 weeks based on an interpretation of Wisconsin law and the Wisconsin Constitution. It is multiple different ways that the liberal justices have exercised their power that have massive, massive impacts on the way Wisconsin is viewed and the way that Wisconsin handles itself, and an even bigger one that people don't talk about yet that might come into reality if Democrats win this election, to not potentially overstand, what they're going to do now, because if Republicans win it, they'll likely overturn this very quickly. But what Democrats are hoping to do is that if they win this election, then strike down the congressional map that Wisconsin Democrats have really suffered under over the past 6 years or 5 years, being unable to win more than 2 seats across the state. Democrats are looking for that to go next. But I want to point out exactly how important, what the elections were in the state of Wisconsin in 2024 because of what happened with that Supreme Court race back in 2023. Wisconsin, their state composition in the state legislature, if we can go ahead and just, use a bit of Wikipedia for us to get there. If we go to Wisconsin State Assembly, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party are roughly at even odds. Republicans absolutely have a majority, but it's 54-45. And the reason I say roughly even is because by a point of comparison, you can see how much things changed. In 2022, Republicans won 54% of the popular vote in the state, yet won 64 out of the 99 seats. An even more egregious example was in 2018, when Democrats won the popular vote in the state of Wisconsin, 53-45, an 8-point margin. Republicans won the majority, though, 63-36. Their gerrymander was impenetrable. Despite massive, massive changes in the voting electorate, the Democratic Party could not crack the number of seats correlated to their vote share. In fact, we're nearly in a super minority at that point. But then, the Wisconsin State Supreme Court redrew the map, and what happened? In 2024, Democrats, despite losing the popular vote, gained 10 seats in the state. It's not perfect, but it's way, way closer. So, if Republicans win tomorrow, the state Supreme Court will likely overturn that previous decision, bring back the Republican gerrymander, not touch the state Supreme Court, not touch the state's U.S. House map, and also likely overturn abortion rights in the state of Wisconsin. So, the implications are heavy. and far and vast, and they matter to a lot of different people. That's why this race is gaining so much traction. That's why this race has so much money being spent in it. So what do we expect tomorrow in the evening? What should we expect by the end of the night? Chances are, based on history and based on what we've been seeing in special elections since Trump's second inauguration, is that Wisconsin State Supreme Court is likely to stay within its liberal ideology. And it isn't just me saying that. I don't like to say that betting markets are a perfect indicator, but they provide one additional piece of context. Context that can help us understand what do the general masses expect in a state like this. Susan Crawford, the liberal-aligned justice, according to Predicted and according to Polymarket, has over an 80% chance at victory based on that point. And it didn't always start that way. Roughly earlier this month, we saw that Susan Crawford began in this market with just a 56% chance. It slowly climbed to 62, 64, 65, 68, 70, 74, and inched its way closer and closer to where it is right now at 86%. The same thing on Predicted. People weren't always as confident on her in this race until now. And I think a big reason for that is because some of the data we are getting out of the state actually tends to lean itself to saying that, hey, Susan Crawford is in a good position. The data we're starting to see out of the state, while initially a bit difficult for Susan Crawford, at the end of it showed that she is going to likely win this race. When you take a look at instances with all of these being Republican-aligned polls too, the fact that Susan Crawford is gaining in support is absolutely alarming. But I will say this. Polling isn't always everything. There was barely any polling done in 2020 when the Republicans were really as into this race as they are right now. Maybe not monetary-wise, but they definitely cared about whether or not Daniel Kelly was going to win this election. And the polling said that he might. Well, he ended up losing by 11 points, but polling isn't everything in state Supreme Court races, and it honestly is very difficult to capture in things accurately and perfect. But it matters, though, that there is a consensus forming, that it does show a general trend line here that is on the up and up for Susan Crawford, and that it seems, as days progress, that she is gaining more and more support. And Democrats should look at that and say, maybe we'll do well in tomorrow's election. The Wisconsin State Supreme Court race, I think, will be a very good indicator, too, of what Democrats should expect in future elections. And it isn't just here either. I mean, we'll talk about the Florida 1st and 6th district races that are likely going to be far closer than many Republicans would hope for in districts as Republican as those. But Wisconsin, just at bare bones, is a swing state. Bare bones is a swing state. It is solely going to be the state that we will be talking about the most over the next, few weeks, talking about election results like these and what it might mean across the national stage. Because I remember back distinctly in 2017 what those early elections meant, what those early races did for the party in the Democratic side, what it did in terms of drive-up enthusiasm when races were within a few points in states like Georgia and Kansas and South Carolina, what it meant that come June time, those runoff elections would lead to 2 to 3 point losses in states and districts that were previously lost from anywhere from 15 to 30 points. And what it eventually led to in 2018 and eventually led to in 2020 and why that matters. I'm not going to say that the next presidential election will be predicted by who wins the Wisconsin Supreme Court race, nor do I think the midterm elections can be predicted by a race that is a year and a half out from said elections or 3.5 years out from said elections. But they provide a snapshot in time based on where we are today. And the national environment is far more conducive to Republicans actually doing well in races like these than it might be in a year and a half from now. Because although Donald Trump still doesn't have the honeymoon period, he hasn't had it for roughly 2 to 3 weeks now. It's still at a record high approval rating that is higher than 90% of his first term. A 47% approval rating is really strong for the incumbent president, given his historical comparisons. But it will likely decrease, because just as we see Susan Crawford rising in support, it is almost directly aligned with the decrease in national support that Donald Trump has seen in terms of approval. What was plus 12 on the day he was inaugurated is down now to -2, -3, and guess what? Based on national popular vote, Wisconsin was one of the closest states from the 2024 presidential election, almost down to less than a quarter of a percentage point being off that of the national popular vote. And so if the nation is shifting 14 points, chances are Wisconsin is too. And you don't just have to take my word for it. When the polling first came out around this race about how voters viewed Brad Schimmel and Susan Crawford, they had relatively low name ID, but they asked questions that didn't just extend to the Supreme Court race. They asked, how do you view Donald Trump? How do you view the members of the Republican Party? And his approval rating was largely in the positive in Wisconsin in the beginning. But the most recent poll we've seen from Marquette University Law School, they do a lot of polls in Wisconsin. That is the state they do and love to do the most. Donald Trump's approval rating is now in the negative. And so seeing that with the national shift to it makes sense that the support for Crawford, although she may not have as much name ID as Brad Schimmel, is going up by nature of being the oppositional figure to Donald Trump. And based on who we've seen turn out in special elections, based on what we can expect to see, based on historical context as well, my expectation is tomorrow that Susan Crawford wins anywhere from 5 to 10 points in the state of Wisconsin. And if she does not, that will be a failure on the Democratic Party's side. But should she do so, it will absolutely be a success. Because it is elections like these that aren't just indicators for the GOP, but for Democrats at large too. And it will be interesting to see that this new strategy that I would never have in a million years expected to be employed in a state Supreme Court race, the hyperpolarization and partisanship of all of these races that used to be nonpartisan, that used to be a lot less higher profile, are now coming to be some of the more nationalized race that you never would have expected before. It'll be very interesting to see what happens come April 1st, 2024, or in just about 48 hours from today when we get the full results, nearly every vote counted, and we'll talk about it the day after or potentially the same day. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2026 House election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.